A warning to our viewers. What you're about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. On a February night in 2005, as a coastal Florida community slept, a nightmare was unfolding inside the Lunsford family home. A nightmare that would shatter the innocence of the quiet fishing town of Homosassa forever. In the morning light, a father's world would collapse with the discovery of an empty bed where his daughter should have been. 9-year-old Jessica Lunsford had vanished without a trace. What no one knew at the time was the horrifying truth. Buried alive in a shallow grave just 150 yards from her bedroom window, Jessica clutched her beloved purple dolphin as she poked her tiny fingers through the plastic bags entombing her, desperately gasping for air in the darkness. She would die alone, fighting for her last breath, while search parties combed the area, passing within feet of where she lay buried. For weeks, hope dimmed as the community searched, but the monster responsible was closer than anyone could imagine. Welcome to the Shadow Files crime series. Tonight's case will shake you to your core. Take a moment to hit subscribe, drop a like, and please let us know where you're watching from. And now, we begin. In early 2005, America was a nation still reeling from changes that had reshaped its sense of security. Nearly 4 years after 9/11, Homeland Security remained the watchword of a country at war overseas. But in small communities like Homosassa, Florida, a fishing town nestled along the Gulf Coast, different concerns occupied daily life. Here, where generations of fishing families had cast their nets into crystal waters, conversations centered on rising gas prices, the aftermath of the previous year's hurricane season, and whether tourist season might bring better fortunes. Technology was transforming American life, though smartphones were still years away. Children were increasingly online, and the first warnings about internet predators had begun to circulate among parents. But Homosassa retained its small-town character. Doors remained unlocked. Children played outside until dusk called them home. Neighbors knew each other's business, for better or worse. In this quiet corner of Citrus County lived the Lunsfords. Mark, a 41-year-old truck driver, his 9-year-old daughter Jessica, and her grandparents Ruth and Archie shared a modest home on Sonata Avenue. Jessica's parents had separated years earlier, but she had found stability with her father and grandparents in this peaceful community. Jessica was a bright-eyed third grader at Homosassa Elementary School, instantly recognizable in photographs by her favorite pink hat and the ever-present purple dolphin stuffed animal she carried everywhere. By all accounts, she was a happy child, kind, playful, and radiating the innocent joy that defines childhood. On the evening of February 23, 2005, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Jessica completed her homework, got into her pink nightgown, and clutched her purple dolphin as she climbed into bed. Mark Lunsford checked on his daughter before turning in himself. It would be the last time he would see her alive. In the early morning hours of February 24, 2005, Mark Lunsford rose before dawn to prepare for his day as a truck driver. It was around 5:45 a.m. when he noticed something amiss. Jessica wasn't in her bed. At first, he wasn't overly concerned. Perhaps she had gotten up early and was with her grandparents. But as he moved through the house, the gnawing feeling in his stomach intensified. Jessica was nowhere to be found. By 8:30 a.m., the dread had crystallized into panic. Mark called the Citrus County Sheriff's Office to report his daughter missing. Within hours, deputies arrived at the Lunsford home, lights flashing against the morning sun. They conducted an initial sweep of the property, examined Jessica's bedroom, and questioned the family. There were no signs of forced entry, no ransom note, no obvious evidence of what had happened to the 9-year-old girl. By nightfall, the search had expanded dramatically. Deputies combed the surrounding woods with flashlights while neighbors joined in, calling Jessica's name into the gathering darkness. The following day, the FBI was called in. Helicopters hovered overhead, search dogs sniffed the ground, and divers explored nearby ponds. The community mobilized with extraordinary speed. Hundreds of volunteers joined law enforcement in the desperate search. Days stretched into a week, then two. Posters bearing Jessica's smiling face, often showing her in her pink hat, appeared across the county and state. The media descended on the small town, broadcasting Jessica's story nationwide. As the search radius expanded, so did the theories of what might have happened. The first couple of days you're hoping that she just wandered off, Sheriff Vincent would later recall. But as you're day 2 into it, day 3, you're starting to realize, yeah, there's something more nefarious happening here. Each passing day without finding Jessica dimmed the hopes of recovery but intensified the determination of searchers. Tip lines rang constantly. Every lead was followed, every witness questioned. Mark Lunsford appeared before news cameras, his face etched with grief, pleading for his daughter's return. For nearly 3 weeks, the search continued without a breakthrough. The community held vigils, praying for Jessica's safe return, even as a growing sense of dread settled over Homosassa. What no one yet realized was that the answer to Jessica's disappearance was hiding in plain sight, just across the street from the Lunsford home. As the search for Jessica Lunsford intensified, investigators implemented standard protocols for a missing child case. Within the first 24 hours, deputies went door to door throughout the neighborhood, questioning residents about anything unusual they might have observed the previous night. Among the homes visited was a small trailer on West Snowbird Court, just 65 yards away from the Lunsford residence, and clearly visible from Jessica's bedroom window. The mobile home belonged to Dorothy Dixon, a longtime Homosassa resident. Dixon told investigators that nothing seemed out of the ordinary on the night of February 23rd. She lived in the trailer with her boyfriend Matt Dittrich, her daughter and son-in-law Mady and Jean Secord, and her 2-year-old grandson Joshua. Investigators made note of the occupants and moved on to the next home, following standard procedure in their expanding canvass of the area. What wasn't disclosed during this initial interview, and what would later prove to be a devastating oversight, was that Dixon had another resident staying with her, her half-brother, who had been living in a room at the back of the trailer. During this critical first visit, investigators were not given access to the entire home, instead speaking with Dixon primarily at the front door before continuing their canvass. As the first week of searching concluded without results, the investigation's scope widened dramatically. The FBI brought in specialized equipment and expertise. Volunteers from across Florida arrived in Homosassa. At one point, more than 540 people were actively searching wooded areas, dragging ponds, and checking abandoned buildings. The media presence grew as the case captured national attention. News vans lined the streets of the once quiet town. Jessica's face appeared on national broadcasts, her story reaching millions of Americans who joined in praying for her safe return. Mark Lunsford became a fixture on television, his exhausted, grief-stricken face pleading for information about his daughter. On March 5, after 10 days of searching with no tangible leads, officials made the difficult decision to suspend physical search efforts to focus resources on investigating tips and leads that had flooded into command centers. By this point, authorities had received over 3,700 tips from across the country. Behind the scenes, investigators continued methodically reviewing everyone with connections to the area or the Lunsford family. Sex offenders registered in Citrus County were interviewed, and their whereabouts during the night of February 23rd verified. Background checks were run on school employees, local contractors, and anyone who might have had contact with Jessica. It was during this phase of the investigation that a crucial lead emerged. On March 12, 2 weeks after Jessica's disappearance, authorities learned about a man who had been staying at the Dixon trailer, a man who had abruptly left town shortly after Jessica went missing. This information didn't come from the initial canvass of the home, but from a separate lead altogether. What investigators would soon discover was that their canvass of Dorothy Dixon's trailer had missed something critical. They had been mere feet away from Jessica's abductor during their initial neighborhood search, separated only by walls and closed doors of the trailer, and potentially, horrifically, just steps away from Jessica herself, who may have still been alive, hidden inside the very same home they had visited. The oversight would haunt investigators for years to come. As we go into the most chilling details of this documentary, take a brief moment to like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, for more in-depth investigations and analysis of significant cases like this. The man who had been staying at Dorothy Dixon's trailer was her half-brother, 46-year-old John Couey. What investigators would uncover about his background sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Couey was no stranger to law enforcement. His criminal record stretched back decades, documenting a disturbing pattern of behavior. He had been arrested dozens of times for burglary, but more alarmingly, he was a convicted child sex offender. In 1991, he had been arrested on charges of fondling a child. Years earlier, in 1978, he had been accused of grabbing a young girl in her bedroom, placing his hand over her mouth and kissing her, a chilling parallel to what would later be revealed about Jessica's abduction. Despite this extensive criminal history, Couey had repeatedly received only short sentences. More troubling still was that under the laws at the time he was not monitored after his release, despite his record as both an experienced trespasser and a repeat sexual offender targeting children. As a registered sex offender, Couey was required by law to notify authorities whenever he changed addresses. He had failed to do so when moving into his sister's trailer on West Snowbird Court, the home just 65 yards from where Jessica had slept. This critical detail had allowed him to live undetected by the system designed to track individuals with his criminal profile. When investigators first began connecting Couey to Jessica's disappearance, they discovered he was no longer in Homosassa. He had left town suddenly in the days following her disappearance. On March 4th, authorities located and questioned Couey in Savannah, Georgia, after he was picked up for an outstanding warrant for cannabis possession. During this initial encounter, investigators were unaware of his potential connection to Jessica's case, and he was released after questioning on the drug charge because it was only a local warrant. 8 days later, on March 12, as the connection between Couey and the Dixon trailer became clear, he was arrested in Augusta, Georgia, at the request of the Citrus County Sheriff's Office specifically for questioning about Jessica's disappearance. When confronted, Couey maintained his innocence, claiming he knew nothing about the 9-year-old's disappearance beyond what he had seen on television news. He stated he had moved to Georgia simply to find work. After this interview, despite mounting suspicions, investigators still lacked sufficient evidence to hold him. Couey was released from police custody, a decision that would haunt authorities when they discovered what had actually transpired in the Dixon trailer. As Couey walked free, the most crucial breakthrough in the case was about to unfold back in Homosassa. On March 14, 2005, nearly 3 weeks after Jessica's disappearance, investigators returned to Dorothy Dixon's trailer at West Snowbird Court. This time, Dixon gave them permission to conduct a thorough search of the entire property. What they found would break the case wide open. Inside a closet in Couey's bedroom, investigators discovered a mattress and pillows with alarming stains. Initial testing indicated the presence of blood. The items were immediately collected and rushed to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement's crime lab for expedited DNA analysis. The results were devastating. Forensic scientists identified both Couey's and Jessica Lunsford's DNA on the mattress. The evidence confirmed their worst fears. Jessica had been in that trailer, just 65 yards from her own home, and something terrible had happened to her there. With this crucial physical evidence in hand, authorities now had what they needed. On March 17, just 3 days after the search of Dixon's trailer, John Couey was arrested in Augusta, Georgia, and formally charged with the murder of Jessica Lunsford. He was transported back to Florida and booked into the Citrus County Jail. The following day, March 18, in an interview room at the jail, Couey did something unexpected. He waived his right to an attorney and agreed to speak with investigators. What followed was an audio-recorded and videotaped confession that revealed the horrifying details of Jessica's final days. During this confession, Couey admitted to entering the Lunsford home through an unlocked door in the middle of the night. He described waking Jessica, telling her, "Don't yell or nothing," and leading her back to the trailer where he was staying. The details of what happened next, the sexual assaults, holding her in a closet, and eventually burying her alive, were so disturbing that they would shake even veteran investigators to their core. This confession would later become a point of legal contention. On June 30, 2006, a judge would rule it inadmissible in court because investigators had not honored Couey's earlier requests for a lawyer, violating his constitutional rights. However, by then, investigators had gathered a substantial body of evidence beyond the confession, evidence that would lead them to Jessica's final resting place. Through Couey's confession and the subsequent investigation, the terrible truth of what happened to Jessica Lunsford finally came to light. On the night of February 23, 2005, while the Lunsford family slept, John Couey entered their home through an unlocked front door at approximately 3 a.m. He made his way to Jessica's bedroom, where he found the 9-year-old sleeping peacefully. Couey awakened Jessica, placed his hand over her mouth and whispered, "Don't yell or nothing." He then instructed the frightened child to follow him. Jessica, likely confused and terrified, did as she was told, walking alongside her abductor the short distance, just 65 yards, from her home to the trailer on West Snowbird Court. For the next 3 days, Jessica was held captive in Couey's room at his sister's trailer. During this time, he repeatedly sexually assaulted the child. The details of these assaults, confirmed by forensic evidence, are too graphic to recount, but they paint a picture of unspeakable cruelty inflicted on an innocent child. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Jessica's ordeal was revealed when Couey admitted that he had kept her hidden in his closet during the day, including while he reported to work at Billy's truck lot. He would order her to stay quiet and not leave the closet, which she obediently did. Investigators were later haunted by the realization that Jessica may have been alive in that closet when they first visited the Dixon trailer during their initial neighborhood canvass. After 3 days of captivity, Couey made a horrifying decision. He knew he could not keep Jessica hidden indefinitely. He told her he was going to take her home, tricking the hopeful child into climbing into 2 garbage bags. Instead of taking her home, Couey carried Jessica to the yard behind the trailer, dug a hole approximately 2.5 feet deep and 2 feet in diameter, and placed her inside it, still alive and wrapped in the plastic bags. He then covered the hole with dirt and leaves. On March 19, following Couey's confession, investigators returned to the Dixon property. There, they discovered Jessica's body buried exactly where Couey had described. The scene reduced hardened law enforcement officers to tears. The medical examiner's report revealed the full horror of Jessica's final moments. Her body had undergone moderate to severe decomposition, but examiners could still determine that she had been buried alive. In a heartbreaking detail that haunts the case to this day, Jessica had poked 2 of her fingers through the plastic bags in a desperate attempt to create an airway. Those fingers had skeletonized, evidence of her final struggle to survive. The coroner determined that even under the best circumstances, death would have occurred within 2 minutes, 3 minutes from lack of oxygen. Jessica had died clutching her purple dolphin. The legal process that followed Jessica's murder underscored how deeply the case had affected the community. By early 2007, prosecutors found it impossible to seat an impartial jury in Citrus County. The tragedy had touched everyone in the area. Residents had searched for Jessica, put up posters, or attended vigils. Many knew the Lunsford family personally. After multiple attempts to find jurors who hadn't formed opinions about the case, the court made the rare decision to move the trial to Miami. Despite the setback of Couey's confession being ruled inadmissible, prosecutors had built a formidable case. The evidence presented at trial was overwhelming. Jessica's blood and Couey's semen on the mattress in his room, Jessica's fingerprints found in his closet, and fiber evidence linking items from the crime scene to Couey. Perhaps most damning were statements Couey had made to jail guards and other witnesses that weren't covered by the ruling that suppressed his formal confession. Throughout the trial, Couey showed little reaction, often spending his time drawing with colored pencils while testimony about his crimes was presented to the court. Mark Lunsford, meanwhile, attended every day, stoically facing the man who had taken his daughter. On March 7, 2007, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury rendered their verdict: guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, burglary, and sexual battery upon a child under 12. A week later, after just 75 minutes of deliberation, the jury recommended the death penalty. On August 24, 2007, the judge formally sentenced Couey to death by lethal injection. Justice, however, would take a different path. On September 30, 2009, before his sentence could be carried out, John Evander Couey died of natural causes in prison. He was 51 years old. For many in the community, his death from natural causes seemed an unsatisfying end to the case, denying the full measure of justice they believed Jessica deserved. In the wake of tragedy, communities often seek meaning, a way to ensure that profound loss serves some greater purpose. Jessica Lunsford's death catalyzed one of the most significant legislative responses to a child murder case in American history. Mark Lunsford, consumed by grief but driven by determination, channeled his anguish into advocacy. Within weeks of losing his daughter, he stood before Florida lawmakers urging them to strengthen laws regarding sex offenders. His powerful testimony helped push forward the Jessica Lunsford Act, signed into law in May 2005, just 3 months after Jessica's disappearance. Jessica's law, as it became known, imposed some of the strictest requirements for sex offender registration and monitoring in the nation. It mandated 25-year minimum sentences for those convicted of sexual crimes against children under 12, and required lifetime electronic monitoring for offenders released from prison. Perhaps most critically, it addressed the very loophole that had allowed Couey to live undetected across from Jessica's home: the failure to register his address change. Had the laws been stronger, had the monitoring been more thorough, Mark Lunsford would later say, Jessica might still be alive today. The impact of Jessica's law extended far beyond Florida. Within 5 years, 42 other states had adopted similar legislation, creating a national framework for tracking and monitoring sex offenders. The federal government considered a national version of the law, though it never passed. In Citrus County, Jessica's memory lives on in tangible ways. In August 2006, Jessie's Place, a children's advocacy center, opened its doors, providing a safe space for victims of abuse and neglect to tell their stories and begin healing. At the Citrus County Sheriff's Office, a Tree of Life plaque hangs in the lobby, its leaves bearing the names of everyone who contributed to the investigation. Mark Lunsford transformed from a truck driver into one of the nation's most recognized child safety advocates. He established the Jessica Marie Lunsford Foundation and traveled the country speaking about child protection. "We all know how to be fighters," he told audiences, "and that's what we need to do for these kids." 20 years after Jessica's death, her legacy continues to protect children across America. At Homosassa Elementary School, a playground stands in her memory, a place of joy built in response to unimaginable sorrow. Even after 20 years, the pain of losing Jessica remains fresh in our hearts, reflected Citrus County Sheriff David Vincent in 2025. The Lunsford family suffered a cruel loss, and our community mourned alongside them. Jessica's case changed the way we approach child abductions, both here in Citrus County and across the nation. Her memory fuels our commitment to ensuring that no family experiences this kind of tragedy again. That smiling girl in the pink hat, clutching her purple dolphin, left a legacy far greater than her 9 years of life might have suggested, one that continues to save lives today. In the end, we return to that photograph. Jessica Lunsford in her pink hat, smiling at the camera, her eyes bright with the promise of a future that would never come. Beside her in those final nights, that purple dolphin, a child's comfort that accompanied her even into darkness. That famous picture of her with her pink hat on and the purple dolphin that she cherished, Sheriff Vincent reflected. You can see that innocence in a child, just a sweet kid that just did not deserve what happened to her. The tragedy of Jessica Lunsford transcends the details of her case. It speaks to our most fundamental duty as a society to protect our most vulnerable. Before Jessica's law, sex offenders could move undetected through communities. Before Jessica's death, the systems designed to track predators were inadequate. Her story changed that. Today, when a child goes missing, Amber Alerts sound across cell phones. Sex offender registries are searchable online. Digital monitoring tracks offenders' movements. Each of these safeguards bears the invisible imprint of Jessica's legacy. 20 years later, that pink hat and purple dolphin remain powerful symbols not just of innocence lost, but of a nation awakened to its responsibility. Jessica's short life ended in unimaginable fear, but her memory continues to shield countless children from the same fate. For Jessica, and for all children, remain vigilant. Report suspicious behavior. Support child safety legislation. And remember that behind every law named for a child lies a story no family should ever have to tell. If you enjoyed this content, join our community by subscribing and turning on notifications. Every subscriber makes it possible for us to keep creating content we're passionate about sharing with you.